In 1865, a quiet young bookkeeper in Cleveland made a decision that would reshape the industrial world. He borrowed money he could barely afford, bought out his partners in a small oil refinery, and stepped into a chaotic new industry where hundreds of desperate men were gambling everything on a black liquid pulled from Pennsylvania soil. Most of them would be ruined within a decade. He would not. Within 30 years, this soft-spoken man controlled roughly 90% of all oil refined in the United States, becoming the richest human being of the modern age. His name was John D. Rockefeller, and his weapon was Standard Oil. This is the story of how patience, secrecy, and ruthless calculation built the most feared monopoly in history. And how it finally met a force even Rockefeller could not control. To understand Rockefeller, you must understand the madness he entered. The Pennsylvania oil rush of the early 1860s was a frenzy. Derricks sprouting overnight, fortunes made and lost in weeks, prices swinging wildly between boom and collapse. It was speculation at its most reckless. Rockefeller looked at this chaos and saw something almost no one else did. Refining, not drilling, was where lasting power lay. Anyone could strike oil and be ruined by oversupply. But whoever controlled the refining and the distribution controlled the entire game. He hated the disorder, the waste, the gambling temperament of the wildcatters. Where others saw opportunity for quick riches, Rockefeller saw an industry begging to be organized, disciplined, and above all, dominated by a single controlling hand, his own. His method began not with violence, but with obsession. Rockefeller was fanatical about efficiency, tracking every barrel, every drop of solder used to seal his tins, every byproduct that competitors threw away. While rivals dumped waste into rivers, Standard Oil turned it into lubricants, paraffin, and petroleum jelly. He built his own barrel factories, bought his own timber, manufactured his own acid. Every cost he shaved widened the gap between his refinery and the competition. By 1870, when he formalized the Standard Oil Company of Ohio, he already ran the largest refining operation in Cleveland. But efficiency alone was not enough for a man who intended to own an entire industry. The next phase would reveal the colder, more calculating strategist beneath the pious accountant's exterior. Rockefeller's true genius and his greatest ruthlessness lay in the railroads. Oil had to be shipped, and the railroads that carried it were locked in vicious competition. Rockefeller offered them something irresistible, guaranteed massive, steady shipments in exchange for secret rebates on freight rates. The more he shipped, the cheaper his transport became, and the cheaper his transport, the more he could undercut every rival. It was a self-reinforcing engine of dominance. But he went further still. He negotiated drawbacks, payments the railroads made to Standard Oil on every barrel shipped by his competitors. His enemies were literally funding his empire without knowing it. This was not merely a discount. It was a weapon designed to make competition mathematically impossible, and Rockefeller wielded it without a flicker of mercy. The scheme reached its most brazen form in 1872 with the South Improvement Company, a secret cartel uniting Rockefeller and the major railroads to rig freight rates against all outsiders. When the plan leaked, the Pennsylvania oil regions erupted in fury. Independent producers refused to sell him crude, mobs marched, and newspapers denounced the anaconda strangling the industry. The scheme collapsed under public outrage before it fully launched. For most men, this would have been a catastrophic defeat. For Rockefeller, it was a lesson. He learned that secrecy must be tighter, that resistance was inevitable, and that public sentiment was a threat to be managed. He abandoned the cartel, but kept its logic, and prepared to conquer the industry the same way, only more quietly, more relentlessly, and more completely than before. What followed became known as the Cleveland Massacre. In a span of just weeks, in early 1872, Rockefeller approached his 26 Cleveland competitors one by one. He showed them his books, proved that his costs were unbeatable, and offered a stark choice: sell to Standard Oil at his price, or be destroyed by competition they could never survive. Most surrendered. He absorbed 22 of his rivals almost overnight, some for a fraction of their worth. Those who sold quickly and quietly were often rewarded. Those who resisted were crushed by ruinous price wars in their own markets. It was a masterclass in strategic terror, the offer that could not be refused, delivered with the calm politeness of a Sunday school teacher. Cleveland's refining industry had become Standard Oil in the blink of an eye. With Cleveland conquered, Rockefeller turned outward, methodically swallowing refineries in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, and beyond. His tactics grew more sophisticated. He would slash prices in a target's home market, selling oil below cost until the rival bled to death, then raise prices once the competitor collapsed or sold out. He planted spies within rival firms and inside railroad offices to track every shipment his enemies made. He acquired competitors secretly, running them under their old names, so buyers believed choice still existed when, in truth, every option led back to him. The illusion of competition became one of his sharpest instruments. Customers thought they were shopping the market. They were shopping Rockefeller's empire, wearing a dozen different masks, each mask feeding the same insatiable machine. To bind this sprawling empire together, Rockefeller's lawyers devised a legal innovation that would echo through history: the trust. In 1882, the shareholders of dozens of ostensibly separate companies handed their stock to a small board of trustees, with Rockefeller at its center. On paper, the companies remained independent, evading state laws against out-of-state ownership. In reality, a single hidden authority now controlled the entire American oil industry from a headquarters at 26 Broadway in New York. The word trust would soon become synonymous with monopoly itself, and the trustbusters who fought them would define an era. Rockefeller had not merely built a company, he had engineered a new form of corporate power. Vast, opaque, and centralized. That governments were not yet designed to see, let alone stop. At the peak of his dominance, the scale of Standard Oil defied imagination. It controlled the refineries, the pipelines, the tank cars, the barrels, the storage terminals, and the retail distribution. A fully integrated colossus stretching from the wellhead to the lamp in a farmer's kitchen. It refined roughly 90% of America's oil and reached into Europe and Asia. Rockefeller's personal fortune swelled beyond any measure the world had known. Yet he lived with striking restraint, teaching Sunday school, giving away dimes to strangers, and viewing his wealth as a divine stewardship. He genuinely believed he had rescued a chaotic industry from ruin, bringing order, low prices, and reliability. In his own mind, he was not a predator but a benevolent architect. history would render a far more complicated verdict. But empires this total breed, enemies this fierce, the ruined refiners, the squeezed producers, and the small merchants driven to bankruptcy did not forget. Their resentment simmered for decades until it found a voice in a journalist named Ida Tarbell, the daughter of an oil man Rockefeller had helped crush. Beginning in 1902, she published a meticulous, devastating series in McClure's magazine, dissecting Standard Oil's secret rebates, its price wars, its espionage, and its lies. She did not rely on rage, but on evidence, laying bare the machinery of monopoly for millions of readers. The public that once marveled at Rockefeller's success now recoiled at his methods. The invisible empire had been dragged into the light, and once exposed, the myth of the benevolent giant began to crack beyond repair. The political tide turned against him. A new generation of reformers, riding the progressive movement, saw the trusts as a threat to democracy itself. President Theodore Roosevelt built his reputation as a trust buster, and the Sherman Antitrust Act, once toothless, became a genuine weapon. The federal government filed suit against Standard Oil, and the case ground through the courts, exposing rebate schemes and predatory tactics in exhaustive detail. Rockefeller, now largely retired, watched from the sidelines as the empire he had spent a lifetime assembling was placed on trial for its very existence. The efficiency he prized, the order he cherished, the dominance he had achieved, all of it was now recast as a crime against the public. The reckoning he had always managed to postpone had finally arrived at his door. In 1911, the Supreme Court delivered its verdict. Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly and must be broken apart. The Great Trust was shattered into 34 separate companies, among them the ancestors of Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and Amoco. It was, on its face, the most crushing defeat imaginable, the dismantling of the largest business empire on earth. And yet, in one of history's great ironies, the breakup made Rockefeller richer than ever. He held stock in every one of the successor companies, and as their shares soared independently, his fortune multiplied. The man punished for building a monopoly profited enormously from its destruction. His personal wealth reportedly approached $1 billion. An almost incomprehensible sum for the era, and a fortune that arguably makes him the richest American who ever lived. The legacy of Standard Oil is written into the modern world in ways few appreciate. The trust's dismantling gave birth to the very energy giants that still power the globe today. Its fragments grew into some of the largest corporations in human history. Its abuses inspired the antitrust laws that shape competition across every industry, from steel to software. And Rockefeller himself, in his long retirement, poured his colossal fortune into philanthropy, funding universities, medical research, and public health on a scale that transformed the world. He helped eradicate diseases and endowed institutions that endure to this day. It is the central paradox of his life. The man who crushed his rivals without mercy became one of history's greatest givers, leaving behind both a warning about unchecked power and a monument to what wealth can build. So, what does Rockefeller finally teach us? That dominance and destruction can wear the same calm, pious face, that the most dangerous monopolist is not the loud tyrant, but the patient organizer who sees the future clearly and moves toward it with cold, relentless discipline. He built an empire so complete that it forced a democracy to invent new laws simply to survive it. He was villain and visionary, predator and philanthropist, ruthless and restrained, often within the same breath. His story is not merely history. It is a template that echoes in every dominant corporation that has risen since, and a permanent question about how much power any single hand should ever hold over the lives of everyone else. If this deep dive into the rise and reckoning of Standard Oil gripped you, then you belong here. On Magnates and Monopolies, we uncover the cutthroat empires, boardroom coups, and business titans who reshaped the world through ambition and ruthlessness. Every week, we bring you another prestige investigation into the men and machines that built and broke the modern economy. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us as we pull back the curtain on the greatest fortunes, the fiercest rivalries, and the most audacious power plays in business history. The next empire is already waiting to be dissected, and you won't want to miss how it rose or how it fell. Hit subscribe, and let's continue the story together.